morning, and welcome to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover what drives today's leaders. Today's show is truly incredible. We are going to be talking about child commercial sexual exploitation, or sex trafficking of children. And I think so many of us are oblivious to this issue, both domestically and internationally. And I think it's going to be disturbing. I think it's going to make you mad. And I think it should. I'm joined today by Margaret Youseff, a graduate student at Regis University, who's going to be co-hosting the first segment with me. And we'll be talking to Rachel Lloyd, the founder and executive director of GEMS, a New York-based organization that is working with trafficked youth. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Rachel, first question so that listeners can come up to speed on the terminology is, how did the term commercial sexual exploitation come about, and what does that include?
The commercial sexual exploitation of children, or kind of CSEC for short, is a term that actually came about in the 90s that was used by the UN and UNICEF. It includes every type of kind of commercial sex act that a young person might be forced to engage in. So whether that's a child who's being trafficked under the control of a pimp, or a young person who's getting sex in exchange for shelter, food, drugs, etc., when they're homeless or runaway. So, I mean, it's a pretty broad term, but I think it's probably the most useful term in terms of kind of describing the breadth of sexual exploitation of young people. It doesn't always just look one way. So anyone under the age of 18 who's engaged in any kind of transaction, commercial transaction in exchange for sex, would be considered to be commercially sexually exploited. And it takes away the kind of child prostitute, teen prostitute language as well, which is just really unhelpful. Right, and a misnomer. I mean, it denotes a level of choice that young people just don't have.
But here in the United States, and in New York City alone, right where you're at, there's an estimated 2,200 children that are victimized by commercial sexual exploitation every single year. And that the average age into the industry is 12 to 14 years old. And I guess I'm struck by that because they're just babies. These young girls are just babies. How does this happen, Rachel?
I mean, it's happening to girls who are already vulnerable, right? I mean, it's happening to 70% of the girls that we serve are or have been in the child welfare system at some point. So, right, have already had some level of kind of trauma at home. It's happening to girls who are low income, predominantly in New York, at least girls of color. So it's happening to girls who are already falling through the cracks of the system and who people don't care about as much, quite frankly, and who are, kind of high on too many people's priority list.
And Rachel, once they get into this as a victim, the challenges of getting out, how do you see that playing out? How do they get out of this lifestyle and victimization?
I mean, generally, they need to come into contact with, some support services. I mean, it's very difficult to get out on your own. It's very difficult to kind of even know that there's options out there that look different if you haven't come into contact with anyone who's telling you that. So, I mean, that's why organizations like GEMS and other folks around the country are critical in terms of providing those options and then creating a kind of safe pathway out of the life.
You two were part of this whole trafficking issue, and you really became an advocate when you came to the U.S. in 1997 to really kind of help women exit the trade, if you will. And you were one of those lucky ones, and you've been to college, and you were able to really take that next step, and how to help these young women through the organization that you founded. Can you tell us a little bit more about GEMS? And that stands for Girls Educational and Mentoring Services, based in New York City.
Yeah, so I started GEMS in 1998, a year after I came to the States, just kind of recognizing that there was an incredible need for services for this population, and no one was serving them, and we weren't even using the kind of word trafficking back then, right? I mean, it was just seen as bad girls who wanted to do this. So I started GEMS originally kind of on my kitchen table, literally, and 14 years later, I mean, we're now the largest provider of services to sexually exploited and domestically trafficked girls in the country. And last year we served about 348 girls and young women.
Rachel, can you tell us about the documentary that was done, as well as the partnering with MTV to raise awareness?
Yeah, so about 5 years ago now, we made a film. It's on Showtime. It's still on Showtime sometimes. It's called Very Young Girls. It's a feature-length documentary, and we've done some kind of short media pieces and had seen the impact of that and really wanted to do something that was kind of, more nuanced and longer. And so, I mean, the film has been incredibly successful. It premiered at the Toronto Film Festival. It's been seen now by over 4 million viewers and continues to be seen, and has had such an impact, I think, on the way that people see this issue. And I'm probably proudest if there's a video clip on there that's like a 60-minute PSA. It's called Hotel, and I think it is probably one of the strongest things out there, speaking to the issue of Johns and demand, because, right, that's an area that we often don't kind of speak to. So, that's been reaching young people on college campuses, and we've been, really focused on addressing boys and young men, like college-age young men, around their frequenting of strip clubs and purchasing women and girls, and really trying to address that socialization of boys and men that says it's okay to purchase another human being.
Well, Rachel, if I may ask, what role do you see technology has played in either the solution or creating a little more of a problem for this?
I mean, we saw it with Craigslist. We're seeing it now with Backpage. The ability to buy and sell girls and young women on the internet has totally changed the face of the sex industry, right? And has made it available to folks who may not have driven around in the middle of the night in a, kind of dodgy area, but are really content to sit at home and order up a girl to their house or to their hotel room on the internet. I think it's just figuring out, right, technology is continually changing, and so we're kind of always a few steps behind, I think, and often behind criminals who are figuring out very quickly how to use technology for their advantage.
Yeah. And it's easy for the perpetrators to remain anonymous somewhat through the internet, so I could see that could be a challenge.
What aspects outside of the internet, I think people are sort of new to that, but what other aspects of the commercial sexual exploitation of children do you feel people are unaware of? What do we not know, and what do we need to know?
On the internet specifically, I mean, I think, right, predominantly it really is right now Backpage, and then 2/3 of sex ads are being sold through Backpage right now. So, I mean, they're kind of the giant in the field right now. Right, I think internet safety, obviously, and I mean, I think, folks are reasonably aware of that, but, being able to talk to young people about internet safety, not just in terms of, if it's some, 50-year-old man trying to talk to your teenage daughter, but, right, it could be a 19-year-old guy, but what he's interested in, right, is selling her. And so, and I think it's important not to do kind of the panic, oh my God, right, our kids are being recruited online as we speak kind of thing, because, right, the reality is that most pimps and traffickers are recruiting girls who are already really vulnerable and who, they're waiting outside shelters, and they're, they can recruit girls from anywhere, frankly. But I do think it's critical that we're having conversations with young people. Right? It's not just stranger danger.
Rachel, are there any signs that we, as, say, your average American, can look for in terms of identifying a child that might be a victim, or even someone acting as a pimp or a John? Is there anything we can do to be on the lookout for?
Right, there's a lot of very familiar signs of child abuse, right, unexplained kind of bruises and, psychological signs, and right, seeing real kind of changes in the young person, but right, unexplained clothing. There's no money that she has, but she has kind of items, right, jewelry, clothing, right, tattoos that look like a brand that have been kind of that seem to denote the property of somebody, a relationship with an older guy that seems really, really controlling, and there are generally some initial signs, and we're missing them, and then by that point, the girl is really caught up, and now is not frequent attending school. Now is not staying at home anymore, right? And so I think it's critical to see those early warning signs.
Can you tell us about some of the struggles? Because I think this conversation just gets pushed aside because it's relatively an uncomfortable conversation to have.
A couple of years ago, I met with the writers of Law and Order SVU for about 3-4 hours, and I saw the difference in the episode that they did a couple of months later, and people were calling saying, I feel like it looks like you've been talking to SVU. Right? And so there's people who will never really understand the policy stuff, will not be interested or not be impacted by that. But there's a ton of people who are watching Law and Order SVU, and that's how they learn about social issues. And so when Law and Order goes from calling girls teen hookers to victims, and frames it as, adult men raping girls, and is able to put it in a way that is talking about kind of exploitation and trafficking, right? That is social change.
Absolutely.
And so, I think, we have to be really creative with how we look at social change and not just kind of think about it in a very narrow sense, but think about how do we reach the maximum amount of people in ways that are relatable and understandable, and make those conversations easier to have.
Well, Rachel, I feel your book really has brought this forward, this issue, Girls Like Us, your recent book, and what has been the response of people reading your book when they meet you?
Really, lovely, right? Honestly, really, really great, and I've been just so blessed by writing the book is a lot of hard work, and you have no idea what the reception is going to be like. I knew that the girls really liked it, but I can remember at one point my editor saying, you have to remember you're not just writing for your girls, and I was like, no, I'm actually writing for, all the 1 in 4 women in our country who's experienced domestic violence or sexual assault, or has a friend or a family member who had, right, or is just knows what it's like to grow up as a girl in our society and all the challenges, or has had a bad relationship, or, right, and so the response of women is saying, look, I didn't have that experience, I wasn't in the sex industry, but this was the first time that I could see how that could have happened to me potentially if things had gone kind of different in my life, has been really, really encouraging.
So Rachel, obviously you are a social change maker in such a positive way out there, and I have to ask, how has GEMS, how has writing the book, how has putting this message out there and creating this social conversation changed you?
I think I've been incredibly blessed to do this and to have, the girls and in my life and to experience kind of so much love and to love them as deeply as I do. The good outweighs the bad, and being able to see people's lives changed, whether that's, seeing girls' lives change through the services that we provide. Obviously that's kind of the ultimate, right? But also seeing people kind of, change in how they see this this issue, or, begin to get involved in this issue, or, change in kind of their judgment of girls. I mean,
well, that is a beautiful attitude, Rachel, and you certainly exemplify going from survivor to leader, and that it is possible, and that must give the girls so much hope. I'd also like to ask the average citizen, again, what can we do to help the plight of these young girls?
I mean, look, I think part of it is just starting the conversation, right? And, you don't have to go out and, rescue trafficked girls. I think, and we don't encourage people to necessarily, start off there. Right? I think it's, getting educated, right? Have a house party. Watch the movie, read the book, begin to understand this issue, begin to share that with people at your church, at your synagogue, at your coffee club, right? I mean, we all have spheres of influence in our lives. We all have, social circles and circles that we're connected to, and so use those kind of spheres of influence to begin to raise these issues. I think beginning to think about, what's happening in your local community. Find out if there are organizations that are already committed to doing this work and support them. Find out what they need first, and generally that's finances, right, or clothing, or do you know what I mean? There's very practical, tangible needs that people need, and for volunteers, I mean, oftentimes, right, it's not necessarily, we need 50 volunteers to come, do street outreach. It's we need volunteers to do admin and fundraising and do, the back office support. And I know that that's not as sexy and as exciting, but that's generally what folks in the nonprofit world need. Right? We all have talents and gifts and resources, and they may not seem relevant or a lot, but I guarantee that there's ways that who you are and what you bring to the table can be helpful in addressing, kind of social change for all of our young people.
Rachel, I love that you said that. Everyone has a gift and a talent that they can bring. And whether it's, out on the street or the non-sexy job, as you would say, working on admin, bringing your accounting skills, doing whatever you do best and bringing it to nonprofits. If this conversation moves you, you need to get out there and get engaged. And Rachel, I have to tell you, thank you so much for your work with GEMS. That's Girls Educational and Mentoring Services. But to find GEMS online, you go to GEMS, GEMS-girls.org. To learn more about the GEMS program with MTV, you go to Against Our Will campaign. Just Google that. And then, Rachel, tell listeners where they can get the new book and learn more and bring it to their book clubs and begin the conversation in their communities.
Girls Like Us is available anywhere books are sold. Get it and share it and get some. We've also been encouraging people, buy some copies for some women in a drug treatment shelter. Buy some copies for some young people in a homeless youth organization, right? And then we've been really asking people to get the book into the hands of folks who really, really could benefit from a story of hope, and to know that they aren't alone. So I encourage people to buy it for themselves, but also think about who in your community might really need to know that, right, there really is hope, and that, that you're precious and that you're valuable and that your life can really, really look different than it does right now.
Rachel, thank you for everything that you do and for the work that you do with these young women, not only in New York City, but all over the country, and for inspiring change and conversation in this area. Again, to learn more about GEMS, the Girls Educational and Mentoring Services in New York, go to gems-girls.org or pick up the book Girls Like Us anywhere books are sold. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Rachel talked a lot about stories of hope, and In this segment, we're going to be taking that a step further. We're first going to talk about the global ramifications and the global issues of sex trafficking and human trafficking. But then we're going to talk about working with survivors and the stories of survivors all over the globe. My first guest is Eunice Stevenson, the chair of the Trafficking and Abuse of Children Action Team with Church Women United. My second guest is Christina Vela, a Spanish teacher and diversity director at Regis High School in Aurora, Colorado, a Somaly mom volunteer, and an ESL certified teacher. And finally, Dr. Randy Lumpp, a professor of religious studies at Regis University in Denver, Colorado, and a Somaly mom volunteer. Una, I want to start with you a little bit because you really have this very broad perspective globally about what's going on in this issue surrounding human trafficking. Can you frame the global perspectives up a little bit and tell us what some of those big issues are that we need to be thinking about?
Well, I first of all have to start that Archie and I took a vacation to New Zealand in 1989, which opened up for me this trafficking and sexual exploitation of children, particularly in tourism in Asia. Ron was writing books on sexual exploitation of children in Asia. And in 1990, May 1st through the 5th, he met with June Ravage Rogers, a Presbyterian missionary, members of the Asian Council of Churches from Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Philippines, and they met in Chiang Mai in Thailand. And while they were there, they started the first group, End Child Prostitution in Asian Tourism. And that was the basis that opened up to us a lot of things that were going on. Mm-hmm. ECPAT and UNICEF helped to organize 3 World Congresses against commercial sexual exploitation of children. The first one was in Sweden, mm-hmm. and I got to attend that meeting because I knew Ron. It's kind of sneaky, but mm-hmm. we wouldn't have got to go otherwise. And while we were in Sweden, the name was changed to End Child Prostitution, Child Pornography, and Trafficking of Children for Sexual Purposes. So it became an international in its scope. There are over 70 ECPAT offices around the world. The United States, while we were in Sweden, the United States had 19 representatives from our government, and Janet Reno's Assistant Attorney General was the head of the group. The first morning we were there, she asked us to gather together as many of the United States NGOs as we could, and there was, I think, 11 of us went and sat round a table. And so Janet Reno's Assistant Attorney General and said to us, "What do you want us to do?" It's like they'd come there, and this was 1996, and they had an empty briefcase. We reamed off 13 ideas, and in 2000, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was signed.
And I want to stop you here because, in our first segment, we talked mostly about the 15 to 18,000 people who are trafficked in the United States alone. But the numbers are staggering globally. I mean, I think the numbers that you provided are somewhere between 600 and 800,000 people annually are trafficked. Now, are these only children and only women, or what does this look like, Una?
Well, what they say, the percentage varies. They say 80% are women, are female, 50% are children.
Wow.
The magnitude of sexual exploitation in Africa, Asia, Central America, worldwide, anything from 2 million to 3 million underage girls and boys are a part of this. Then we look at some of the issues, what actually starts to give, why are these people trafficked? Mm-hmm. Why are they trafficked? Basically, when we look at poverty, is one of the issues, but there's all kinds of issues. Some of them are to do with how women are valued in countries.
In society, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
in society. The number of children they have, so they cannot provide for them. But also there's a lot of other things, political things, and of course the big thing is this is a money-making proposition.
Sure. So Una, how can we work on this? How can listeners work to end poverty and end this cycle that goes on between poverty and trafficking and all of those things? How can we do that?
One of the things is buy fair trade products. Microloans is an excellent way of helping, particularly lifting up women so that they are valued in society, because microcredits help women to be productive in their communities, and then they start getting the respect of the men in the community. And then Heifer International is another one. But a must-read is the book Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunities for Women Worldwide by Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Woodan. When I read that book, I was impressed because it's worldwide.
And so it really addresses these big issues. And again, the name of the book, Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide. The authors are Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Woodan. Una, you are certainly an expert in this arena and certainly have the expertise here. We have to go to a break. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll be talking more with Una Stevenson, as well as Dr. Randy Lumpp and Christina Vela from Regis High School and Regis University. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Driving Force Radio. In the first half hour, we talked with Rachel Lloyd as well as Una Stevenson about what's going on in the human trafficking industry. And when we went to break, we were talking with Una about some just staggering and very explicit numbers, statistics around this issue. Una, I want to come back to you, but Randy and Christina, I want to come to you now. I know that you guys have worked on this global trafficking issue very directly, and I know that you're very engaged in this conversation. And Randy, I want to start with you. Tell me a little bit about how you got engaged in this very large conversation, and what is it that you guys are doing?
Well, Una has been talking about the huge story, and our story is really very small and very local in many ways. How did we get involved in this? The best way I can represent that is to say you never know what your kids are going to get you into. My wife and I have a son, Nick, and he and one of his college classmates, Jared Greenberg, announced at one point that they were going to go to Cambodia, and we were thinking, what is this about? I hadn't had very many thoughts about Cambodia or even about trafficking for that matter. So we said, well, why are you going to Cambodia? And he said, well, we've discovered this woman whose name is Somaly Mom in Cambodia. She was herself a victim of trafficking, and she decided that she wasn't going to walk away from this without doing something about it. And so she began an organization called AFASIP in Cambodia, which rescues girls and young women from trafficking situations, from brothels and so forth, and rehabilitates and reintegrates them into society. And Jared and Nick said they either could wait till they were rich and famous to do something about this, or they could get after it right away. So they decided that they would go to Cambodia. So they emailed Somaly and they went to Cambodia. They came back with a resolution to start a foundation, and that is the Somaly Mom Foundation, which is designed principally to get support, especially here in the United States, for Somaly's operation. What Somaly does, she has a set of centers where these young women are taken care of, sheltered, educated, medical care, counseling, the whole works, including occupational training and so forth. Anyway, as they got this foundation going, my wife and I began to say, well, what could we do to help support our son, who was trying to get this organization off the ground? And we ended up with a kind of two-pronged thing. And I want to say that out of this has come the organization that I think Christina and I represent, which is a kind of informal group of people in the local Denver area and in the state of Colorado who have tried to address the problem of, or the issue of, what do we do about the survivors? Is there something we could do? So we're thinking about what would be something, since we're educators, what would be something we could do? We said, well, English language, at least we were told that learning English language is a very, very powerful tool in helping these young women get a purchase on a career and on life in general. And so we came up with the idea of having well, in a way, a kind of English language summer camp here in Denver. And the foundation had started a program called Voices for Change. And out of the many, many hundreds of young women, a group was selected who were intended to become Somali's successors, at least activists who were going to actually be trained and learned and become active in doing the work itself, rather than just being recipients of it. And so we started a summer program. We were fortunate to discover Christina, who will talk a little bit about her aspect, which was the design and operation of the actual English language program. And my wife and I and our family and friends and all sorts of other connections got together to work on providing an alternative cultural experience, a confidence building exercise, and so on. So, make a long story short, the first group came in 2009. Yep. We had 6 young women who had never been out of Cambodia. And they came and they lived with us, and they went to school every day up on the Regis campus. Regis donated some space for us. And then we took them on weekends to the mountains and into all kinds of other experiences that were meant to get them to not only have an alternative experience, but to practice the English. I think the one phrase that came out over and over and over again was speak English, speak English, speak English.
Absolutely, and I think it's so fantastic that it wasn't about the focus on the brutality of it, but it was really this focus on re-engaging in life and re-engaging both culturally as well as with new language and new people and all those things. And Christina, I want to come to you because I know that you really were instrumental in building this English as a second language, this ESL program that these young women learned. And can you talk about what got you motivated to do this and what you did in this program and this process?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that got me motivated to do this was just the fact of being able to work with girls who are coming from Cambodia. It was their first time coming to the United States. And I didn't know a whole lot about the program that Somaly had put together before I started working with this group of girls. And I really, through the course of the summer, that first summer, I learned an awful lot about that, because as the summer developed, what really became a very central portion of our curriculum was storytelling. When the girls first arrived, they knew no English, especially the first year of girls that came. There were a couple of girls who they couldn't respond to how are you. They couldn't respond to what is your name. They had no idea what the answers to those questions were because they didn't understand them in the first place. And by the end of the summer, a 6-week program, and granted we were working with them 8 hours a day in class, and then they were going home and speaking with Randy and his wife and his family and all of the friends that they were able to meet through Randy's family. By the end of the summer, they could sit down with everybody and just jabber away about their story. And the story would always start off with, I am a survivor. And it would move on from there to, this is what my story looked like, and this is what it looks like now. This is what my dream is. So the other thing that we started talking about, besides just what is your story, it was what is your dream for the future. In the Cambodian language, they don't have past tense and they don't have future tense. They only have the present tense. And it became very, very fascinating through the course of working with them, trying to teach them how do you use the past tense and how do you use the future. And so really it was, where have you been and what have you done and what have you experienced? And now that's behind you. And how are you growing and changing towards the future? So what are your goals? I will do this. I will do this. And just hearing them talk about that is so inspiring. Yeah. And the fact that they're able to talk about it after 6 weeks of being here and having class was absolutely amazing. We would have lots of different people that came in to work with us. Once a week they would come in and I would pair up one girl with one English speaker and have them talk back and forth. And the first week it was, hi, my name is, and by the end of the week it was, this is what I've done and this is my dream. My dream is to own a farm so I can make all kinds of food and so that I can employ other survivors so that they too can participate in this. And actually that farm, I really want it to be a ranch vacation place where people from all over the world can come and stay. And I'm like, wow, that's your goal? Oh yes, absolutely. But first I have to be an activist. But first I have to let people know that this is something that's happening. And first, before I get a chance to do that, I really need to talk about where I've been.
Yeah, and have that voice.
Right, and have that voice. And I think that hearing that story from the girls was just absolutely amazing. So that inspired me very much.
Sure. I bet that was life-changing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to come back to you. I know you've been instrumental over the course of your journey in the human trafficking conversation at helping build awareness, at helping build legislation and getting people to move off the dime, if you will, and recognize that this really is a problem. I heard you talk about legislation and that presidents and countries are doing all these things, but I would assume that this means that there needs to be some sort of somebody enforcing the laws and looking at these things. Are people doing that right now? And if so, is it where it needs to be, Una?
No, not in any form or shape as far as coming from the legislative level. It seems like groups like ECPAT USA, it's working here, Polaris Project, are the people who are the ones that are working to push legislation, going to Congress and talking about what things are. But some of the things that we're up against is sex tourism. 23 to 25% of the people who use children sexually in developing countries are Americans, which is an astounding thing. 9% for Japan, so you can look at what we think ethically.
Yeah.
There is a code of conduct that was produced by the Swedish ECPAT group, and ECPAT USA is the where to go for that, and we have a website. Also, child pornography. At the Third World Congress in Brazil, out of the 3,213 commercial websites hosted in Brazil, 54% of those child pornography websites started in the US. We have children that are just victimized because we like pornography. A question I had, do people who view pornography ever consider they are supporting the abuse and trafficking of children?
Absolutely.
Pornography creates a rationalization for exploiters of children as to how and why they're sexually exploiting children. Pornography is also used in sex trafficking in the sex industry to train women and children to act and perform. The next thing is sweatshops. and this is where some big legislation is coming in. An estimated 27 million people are trapped in sexual slavery and trafficking, as well as working for sweatshops. Question: when you buy clothing and other cheap goods, does it ever occur to ask yourself, why are they so cheap? Parents can't take care of their children if they get 30 to 40 cents per hour for a garment that we pay $11 for.
Right.
Children, boys and girls, work 17 hours, 7 days a week. May the 5th, 2006, I received the most startling email from the National Labour Committee, an anti-sweatshop group. And it said, U.S.-Jordan Free Trade Agreement descends into human trafficking as tens and thousands of foreign gas workers are trapped, stripped of their passports, and worked in involuntary servitude. The statement is more than $1.1 billion worth of garments are shipped into the U.S. duty-free. It's like NAFTA and CAFTA. Same things happen there. We're using their factories to produce sweatshop things so we can have them. The legislation that's coming up to date is a bill H.R. 5739, Business Transparency on Trafficking and Slavery Act. This is the first time we've had legislation like this. There was one in 2006, but it never got anywhere. So we, the Church Women United, are going to make this as one of our main things that we push for this legislation to pass.
Sure. And you and I know the Church Women United and the work that you've done, that you say something to the effect of, obviously if you lay a hand on a child, you're an abuser.
Yeah.
But if you don't do anything about this problem, you also
Are an abuser. This was the logo for the first World Congress and every Congress, and it's a child with a hand. If you help end child trafficking and sexual abuse, you are a protector. But if you do nothing about it, you are one of the people that are helping the other people being trafficked. You are promoting trafficking.
Absolutely.
And sexual exploitation.
Randy, I want to come back to you. I know before we got started today, you said, you know, the work that you've done with Somaly Mom and the work that you've done in this area has really changed your life, and that you now have, I think you said, 11 Cambodian daughters. Can you talk about that and how this work has changed your life, and what can people do to get engaged around this area? I think people hear these big staggering numbers and oftentimes are a little put off or a little scared to say, I can make a difference. How can people do that, Randy?
Well, first of all, as I said earlier, I hadn't given much thought to this problem or any aspect of it, let alone doing anything about it. And so it was a tremendous gift, as we look at it now, to have had our son get involved in starting something that was totally off of our screen. One of the things that has struck me so much from the two groups of young women that have come to live with us and participate in the program is their immense joy and positiveness and hopefulness, and you know, I keep thinking, if I'd been through things like this, would I be anywhere near this? They are just wonderful, and that in itself is transformative, and it is so exciting to work with something where they are really growing and developing an alternative. UNA has mentioned a number of formal organizations that are operating. As far as we're concerned, I think we hope that we can do something, but we're kind of regrouping now, because after 2 years of selecting groups, Voices for Change has changed its focus a little bit in the sense of working on developing activities, activist things in Cambodia, and they're having a great deal of success, and these girls are growing like crazy as the young women as they deal with police and courts and so forth. As far as we're concerned, I think we're at the point now of trying to reevaluate and say, what is the next move? Where are we going to go from here? I think it's, as far as our local group, it's still going to be in the realm of education and supporting that. Don't know where that's going to go yet. I would really recommend people who want to find specific ways to help would be to contact the Somaly Mom Foundation. Somaly.org is the website, and there are all kinds of activities going on that the foundation is supporting. Also might be useful to look at the AFESIP, that's AFESIP.org website, which is Somaly's organization in Cambodia, and there are also a wide range of things there that people can find out about and participate in financially and in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Christina, I know you said too that working with these girls was life-changing for you, and that you got the wonderful opportunity to go to Cambodia last year and go back and work with some of the girls that you've worked with historically, and that they're actually becoming change makers. They're actually becoming activists. Tell me a little bit about that before we sign off.
They definitely are. It's so amazing to see just the joy and energy, like Randy mentioned, that they bring. They're laughing and joking and making comments all the time, but they're also incredibly serious about what they're doing. They are very well aware that they are activists and that they are out there fighting the fight. And it's amazing to see the energy that they bring to it, and it's understandable because they understand more than anybody else can where the victims are at, and they also understand the hard work that it takes to become a survivor. But I think that they also understand that humor and joy and laughter is the way to go about doing that. Sure. And so being around them is just so impressive. And being in Cambodia last summer was amazing because I'd spent 2 summers working with these 2 different groups of girls, and then to be there and be able to visit their house and visit their work site and go to some of the centers that Randy mentioned to see other girls who were not part of the Voices for Change program but were also working on being survivors, and to see what it took to do that was very, very amazing. They've got psychological work, they've got medical work, they've got hands-on work where they're really teaching them that there are other ways to provide for themselves and not sink back into this victimization.
I love that. Randy?
I just wanted to mention that we stay in touch, even though with technology these days, we have Skyped recently, and they called us the other night when they heard about the fires in Colorado, and they were concerned, and so they called to see if we were. And this is always a wonderful experience.
They're so concerned with things that are happening here just as much as they are with the things that they're fighting for. So they have a wide scope and a global vision, I think, of what it is that they're working on.
Well, for those of you listening today, we have 3 amazing change makers in this conversation around human trafficking and moving from victim to survivor. Eunice Stevenson, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Christina Vela, thank you for being with us.
You,
and
pleasure.
Dr. Randy Lumpp, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
And to learn more about the Somaly Mom Foundation, you go to Somaly, that's SOMALY.org. To learn about ECPAT, you go to ecpatusa.org. And then, to learn about some of this legislation that Una brought to us, it's at thomas.loc.gov. And you can learn more there or at the Global Labor and Human Rights Office in Pittsburgh at glhr.org. Thank you so much for joining us today on Driving Force Radio. Get out there, use your talents, use your skills, and be a change maker in this larger conversation. Think about this. There are millions of children being trafficked, young women, young boys being trafficked, and there is something you can do. Get engaged, stay positive, use your joy, use your gifts, use your talents, use your skills, and be a change maker for good. Have a wonderful weekend, and thanks for joining us.